very good afternoon to everyone. I think at the outset, I'd like to say that I'm literally standing between value for all of you, which is lunch, post the valuation, which is the award ceremony on a talk of values. So in the spirit of values, I'll request you all to be please patient with my presentation. So moving deep into the whole concept of, if you look at this, clip art which I've put here, COVID and the post-COVID era, if I can call it post-COVID, hopefully there's not going to be another wave, but if you look at it, the world has moved from VUCA to BANI, and I'll cover what that is all about. Can we move to the next slide? Or do I have a pointer here, or I depend on you? Okay. This one? Okay. Okay, got it. So as Katie O'Neill, in her book of Weapons of not mass destruction, but mass destruction said, our own values and desires influence our choices. And these are choices which we make in decisions. And these decisions are driven by data-based insights. And the data we choose to collect are the questions we ask. Models are therefore, as per Kathy, opinions embedded in mathematics. And this is a great book, which I'll encourage all of you to read if you have not read. So why am I talking about machine ethics, or what is the role of ethics in machine learning, right? The whole concept of machine learning and systems implementing this, as we will see later in this discussion, raises several aspects of ethics, right? And this very clip art again, right? I remember 2 years back at the start of COVID, I worked for a healthcare transformation company. We decided to launch a digital front door and put a humanoid robot in some of our US-based client locations. So we started off with a proof of concept or a prototype. And at the launch of the event, when everything was going as per plan, our HR had asked me a question that, hey, why did you choose a robot which was white in color? Right? So fortunately for the event, we had also a pink lady robot, if you will. Right? So we had 2 of them. So we quickly swapped that, but made me think that traditionally our minds, the inherent bias has been programmed to talk about fairness even in terms of the way the robots are designed. And going back to my days in Standard Chartered Bank 3-4 years back, I used to work in the Middle East market. And again, inside a bank, just pre-COVID, we were looking at a particular way to implement, if I can say, a digital front door even in a bank, if such a thing exists, but basically a humanoid robot and a drone which would greet visitors and literally create a drive-in banking experience. During the implementation of that prototype again, when we successfully launched the robot, we realized that senior citizens and elderly people could not relate to a humanoid robot, right? It's very common to see these humanoids, these robots, and bots and all of this stuff implemented in the world around us, right? So there are aspects of how data privacy is maintained, how accuracy is ensured in terms of what processes are being automated, if I can say so. And there are also some questions which need some deep reflections on what is happening in the current environment. And going back to my point, we always spoke about a world which is volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and we've moved to a world which is BANI. And what is BANI? We will come to that. But end of the day, it's all about not just retrofitting the concept of ethics or values into a machine learning or an artificial intelligence system, but understanding the intent behind a process and understanding what drives the decision making, right? So it's way beyond just a statistical analysis or something. And this is part of my research, which I did with one of the former founders and heads of Stanford Research Institute a few years back. And again, this is the example I started off at the beginning of the talk also, right? Like, if you look at any organization today, we are always focused, and I intentionally kept valuation right at the bottom of this, what I call the golden pyramid. And primarily, organizations are trying to increase employee value. They're trying to increase company valuation. They're trying to, add value in every sense to the customer, right? But there is also an important, I would say equal or more important focus on the concept of values. So as organizations which are implementing AI and ML, I think it's very important and pertinent that we consider how do we factor these ethics and values in AI ML systems. So I'll ask you to do a self-evaluation because, again, on a lighter note, it's very unfair within quotes to expect me to cover a topic like this in 15 minutes, but I'll try to do a fair job. But If you can just think about this, would you replace a human in a self-driving car of an Uber app? Suppose the driver it was just a self-driving Tesla car. Would you do that? Would you be comfortable? Like 2 weeks back, my mom had to undergo a robotic surgery, and that made her paranoid. I mean, the fact that a non-living thing, if I can call it so, with all due respect to robots and miniature robots in surgeries, she could not relate to the concept of something which is not animate, trying to save her or cure her of her illness. And talk about mission control systems, be it airplanes, look at the space research which is going on in the International Space Station. And a lot of this will also come with, I can say, some very useful anecdotes. So any of you can take a guess who this person on the screen is. And there's a clue there. He's a guy who saved the world, and he saved the world on 26 September 1983. Exactly. Thank you so much for that answer. So, your good name, please? Bijoy, thanks for that. So, this is Stanislav Petrov, and there's a movie actually which is called The Man Who Saved the World, right? So, at the time of the Cold War in 1983, I think when Russia had just shot down Korean Air or airlines, and there's a lot of, I'll say, conspiracy theories on shooting down of airplanes and all of that, the Russian nuclear center suddenly saw blips on the radar, which made the mission control at Russia think that 5 nuclear missiles were headed towards this Russian nuclear site. And this guy was at the helm of the radar or the control. And, just like the movie Matrix, he had maybe instead of the red pill and the green pill, he had the red button and the green button. And he chose not to press the green button. And had he pressed the green button, I don't think many of us would have existed here, especially if we were in the western part of the world. But he prevented a nuclear holocaust. So there's so much of credit given to him. He's an unsung hero, and that's why a movie was made recently, I think 3-4 years back. I encourage you to see that on YouTube. But again, in his decision-making, in spot decision-making moments, and I've experienced this as I've worked in various global firms with senior management, you could have the best of decision-making tools. You could have the best of RPA-assisted processes. You could have the best of automation in everything you do for your customers. But decision-making happens in a very intuitive way. It happens on the fly. How is a machine learning algorithm or an artificial intelligence implementation actually going to factor that? I also had an experience just pre-COVID in August 2019, and there's evidence of that, my selfie with pilots. I don't want to take a selfie like this with pilots after surviving a near plane crash. And this was never reported, funnily. I don't want to name the airlines, but the complete onboard system computer of the flight had failed completely. And the flight had just taken off 100 feet from Singapore Changi Airport, headed to Colombo, and we managed to ground it. The pilots managed to ground it in emergency mode. It also made me think in this era of self-launching rockets, self-docking rockets, and rockets which come and fall back, what's the guarantee that there is no impact or harm to humanity as a whole? Do these machines think and feel like us, right? So a few years back when I gave a TED Talk in Singapore, I did an experiment. It's a very naive experiment, but I just want you to listen. Can you just play that video, please? Shraddha, can you play the video on the other side? So the reason I showed this plane crash as she's bringing it up is it made me think that will machines be able to feel what the end user or the end customer is experiencing? It was a very, very scary experience to come out of a flight which had almost crashed in an emergency mode. So we did this experiment with various, it's a very simple conversational AI experiment. You could take out your own phone and you could do it. How many of the big tech companies have programmed their voice assistants to understand, to feel, to emote like human beings? Do they understand that, right? So when I did this in 2018, can you just play it not from the beginning, or maybe from, a little more ahead. I actually positioned it right. Okay, so want of time, because I have maybe just 7-8 minutes left. If you take your Apple Siri and ask it whether it can feel, when I did this in 2018 across voice assistants, I asked the questions like, I asked Siri if Siri liked if Siri liked Google Assistant, if Google Assistant liked Alexa. Do you even think of programming our conversational bots that way? We don't. 3-4 years back, we never did that. And that's what I'm trying to do on different devices here. I don't know why the audio is not playing, but be it a Samsung device where you have the Bixby. And I found that Amazon devices, even at that time, maybe were slightly better in terms of feeling, at least answering. But today, interestingly, when I asked Siri this question, I asked Siri, Do you have feelings? Hey Siri, do you have feelings? So Siri is saying, I'm beginning to understand a kaleidoscope of emotions just from observing humanity. Hey Siri, do you like Google Assistant?
I'm a big fan of good listeners and helpful beings.
So I hope you heard that. So Siri says that she is a big fan of, he says that it's a big fan. So even gender aspect comes in here in terms of values and ethics. But moving on back to the presentation, because the audio is not working, I'll share the link separately. But it was a very interesting experiment to see how in the last 3-4 years, even big tech companies have programmed their voice assistants to behave literally like human beings, right? When I asked this question 3 years back, I would not get a proper response. So Barney is an acronym which is brittle, anxious, non-linear, incomprehensible. And I'm not going to relive the agony of COVID with all of you, but the world itself has changed in terms of the way we perceive it. And it's not just about uncertainty around us. If you look at this, the need for implementing or factoring Barney aspect into the design of AI and machine learning systems and building concepts of ethics is important because the world today will undergo several waves or climates of Barney, right? COVID itself has generated so much of anxiety which led to empathy and need for mindfulness. Look at the non-linear kind of growth which we have seen. We never expected. Today we talk about the great resignation. Right? So I'm sure no AI/ML algorithm can accurately predict. We have a bunch of them in our own organization and in past organizations. But none can accurately predict what a candidate is feeling after an interview. A few years back, for the CEO of a large multinational bank where I was working, again, we implemented a voice-based, if I can say, bot in the customer calling center. And we wanted to see whether the bot is able to recognize or sense the emotions of the customer based on the tonality. And would it learn? Would it self-learn? Now, the company which we worked with itself had evolved and maybe now has become a unicorn. But it was very interesting to see that at that time, I'm talking about maybe 6-7 years back, we as an industry did not think about this. So moving from VUCA to Barney, right? And moving from feeling worn out to learning how to respond to this crisis is something which we need to ensure that our machine learning algorithms and AI systems are factoring in. And not trying to get a little bit theoretical here, I don't know if any of you recognize this matrix. So I spoke about the volatile circumstances which we lived in. I spoke about the need for feelings and emotions, and the need for values, the need for feeling safe in an environment which is increasingly getting automated. Any idea what is this matrix? This is, again, for want of time, I will elucidate it quickly in a couple of lines. This is Ralph Stacey's complexity matrix. And it is very important and very pertinent to understand these management frameworks, if you will. And Ralph Stacey was one of the leading management thinkers. Again, little unsung, I would say he was known for the Stacey complexity matrix, which looked at how far from certainty or how close to certainty and how far and close to agreement are situations which we operate in. Now, instead of putting yourself as a human being into this, I would request all of you again to self-assess and imagine if you're developing a machine learning algorithm, if you're developing an artificial intelligence system, and if it was to operate in the areas of anarchy or complexity for tasks which are repeatable, which are learnable, it will be able to do well. But there are several situations, as I will show subsequently now, that you may not be able to make the algorithm function with the right level of accuracy. You could get efficiency, but accuracy would be different. What happens when, for example, people in an environment are far from agreement? Take the candidate hiring process. If you even had a bot to streamline the automation of the process of recruiting, onboarding, and all that, will it be able to sense how satisfied the candidate felt with the interview experience? Would it be able to sense how happy an employee is after joining the organization in 3 months? Would it be able to recognize political situations where there are a lot of disagreements between people while outcomes can be certain? So this is a very good framework, which is, I think, so far not been applied in the field of machine learning and artificial intelligence. But I'm trying to build a paper again with the IITs to see how we can apply some of these management frameworks, because end of the day, values, ethics are driven by decision making. And decision making is something which we humans are very, very good at, right? So what will happen when we implement these systems in situations which demand extraordinary management techniques? So there are several articles. I'm not going, this is about recruitment and how you spoke about at one point of time, I think around 10, 12 years back, I implemented around 15 of the credit bureaus in the Southeast Asia Pacific region working for a company. And I've seen that, again, as we build value-added products and services, as we enable the credit bureaus, for example, to determine the credit worthiness of a customer. It's a typical machine learning problem, again, in United States of America today. So how do we make sure that the decision-making is values-oriented and it does not bias? There are talks also about, can not only machine learning predict crimes, prediction of crimes in the US is determined on where police incidents happen. So this reminds me again of World War II, when one of the ministers of a European country started analyzing in those old days of planes where the bullets were striking the plane. And he came to a conclusion looking at the tail and the head of the plane to say that, oh, maybe we should strengthen the armor here. But he was completely missing out the center part, the engines, which are also vulnerable and which could not have been part of the data sample set. So if you look at this, how do you, for example, train computers or machine learning algorithms to predict crime, right? And how do we take the bias out of criminal justice? There's something which is a Marshall project on the new science of sentencing. So there are some worries about AI near term, right? In terms of people also feeling at risk. When we implemented this robot, for example, in our recruitment process, the security guard came and asked me, am I going to lose my job? Right? So I told her, you still need to be there because the robot needs to be charged. You need to step in when there's a deviation from the agreed process of recruitment. So this Dilbert strip is one of my favorites, like approaching the assistant and Siri fulfilling the requirement. Or look at the mission control systems today, which are completely automated, or self-driving cars, maybe referring to humans as just a piece of meat. So how do we build this ethics? How do we build these values into that? And what is the concept of fairness? How do you enable a machine learning algorithm to treat people equally? There's no way you can program that. And if we look a little bit ahead, in terms of how big data patterns and analytics are again triggering some sorts of discrimination. Because you're looking at large data sets, but maybe you're missing out some of the skewed data, some of the patterns which are not being captured in the clusters which the machine learning is analyzing. And there are articles on how math is becoming racist and algorithms could discriminate, and the cliched argument of fairness in the sense of race and ethnicity. And is there an algorithm which can be less racist or less biased than a human being? So machine bias is something, again, like there's a classic example of in the US where police incidents were happening maybe more in neighborhoods which were less wealthy than the neighborhoods which were more wealthy. And therefore, policemen assuming that crime rate is higher in the suburbs than in the urban areas. So there are machine learning and social norms, which we need to consider when we are building our systems, be it privacy, fairness, transparency, accountability. And how do we do this? How do we achieve this in terms of building a system which has these aspects into this? How do we, while we preserve the privacy, how do we, in certain sensitive cases, like you look at information which normally you would not want the machine learning algorithm to bias on, for example, gender or race, how do you develop a fair machine learning? So for that, we need to understand that data input is key. The kind of models, the subpopulations which we are analyzing as part of the machine learning algorithm can again have an impact on creating a sense of algorithm. And at the end of the day, it is an algorithm which learns, and the more we train it, the more it will learn. And I think, how am I doing on time? 3 more minutes? Okay. So I'll keep it for the questions maybe. And in terms of real human life, it is not a linear, and that's why I spoke about Barney. So when we design the future machine learning algorithms, we need to consider, as I was showing you also the complexity matrix of Ralph Stacey, how will a machine learning algorithm handle uncomplicated situations where the outcomes are uncertain, right? And it's very defined to define all of this theoretically, but how do you, for example, determine a score? Just like in a credit score, you give a score based on how well a person has repaid. Can we generate a score of how well a machine learning algorithm is learning and inculcating these aspects of ethics and values? And how do we reduce or make the algorithm less biased? The first thing is to become cognizant of the fact that AI systems and machine learning are are vulnerable to bias. And also, most companies are, if you look at even search bots, you look at some of the social media giants, they're always looking for or targeting specific sets of customers. So you're building an inherent bias at scale, and that needs to be avoided. And the cliched age-old statement of garbage in, garbage out since the start of computing, we need to ensure that there is a lot of quality in the data. And last but not the least, there has to be transparency in the decision making. There has to be, if I can say, validation with a human being who's operating the machine learning algorithm. There has to be detailed observations to understand what are the patterns which are deviating from normal, if I can say, human circumstances of decision making and values. And we will have to address some of the top ethical issues in AI, not just AI, but also in ML, in terms of, are these going to, we talk about so many different Hollywood movies where we see robots taking over everything. So the fear of unemployment, the fear of ensuring an equal society, and avoiding artificial stupidity, right? And eliminating this concept of bias, which I spoke about. So how do we make AI, ML more human, right? And as I was saying, some of the issues in data, I'll just skip this for want of time. And famous example again of the moral machine, which self-driving car, which sees a pregnant woman crossing, and then you have a barrier there. So, and then you also have a cat crossing the street. So what is the situation which is going to happen, right? Is the car going to kill the cat? Is it going to avoid hitting the lady and going to the barrier? So several of these outcomes, therefore, will have to be analyzed. And I'd just like to give due credits to some of the papers and sites which I referred here. And I'll end on that note and maybe possibly open to Q&A. And I hope I did a fair job in 15, 20 minutes. Thank you.